Mono no Aware, An Awareness of Impermanence by Nabil Haque. Mono no Aware loosely translates as an empathy towards non-human things. It is also known as a sensitivity to ephemera, meaning an awareness of impermanence and the transience of life. In Japanese culture, where this term originates, it is inherently linked with the country's landscape and the visceral change in its seasons. In Ford End Road, Bedford, the term is applied to understand the cyclical processes which determine the path of our landscapes. It is used to show an understanding of rest, recovery, and rehabilitation in both natural and human life. Therefore, this is a story about time. It is a story concerned with the passing of time through a damaged and journeyed landscape, questioning the temporality of any architecture which might lie in it. It is a story concerned with the passing of time required as both the human body and our second body, nature, heals. It is a story described at 4 different timescales: the century, the decade, the year, and the day. Finally, I conclude with the proposal itself. The first timescale is that of the century. The project reminisces on the industrial past of the landscape, and specifically its existence for over 100 years as a gasworks. Traditionally seen as an oppositional force to the natural ecosystem, the landscape strategy looked to herald and celebrate this past, imagining a future in which industry and nature existed in synthesis. This began with understanding the biological, ecological, and physical effects of the gasworks at both a microscopic and macroscopic scale. In addition to these findings, we discovered buried foundations of the former gasworks, explored through an archaeological plan cut 600 millimeters below ground surface. Unearthing these hidden histories, the foundation had a subliminal horticultural impact on the site, affecting the growth of certain resilient species such as dog rose and bramble, and hindering the growth of larger trees such as oak and lime. Our landscape manifesto for the site was as follows. We believe the physical erasure of the site's past was merely superficial, and that the remnants of this force were in the landscape formally, metaphorically, and biologically. As seen on the landscape plan on the right, we first acted as archaeologists, unearthing the hidden histories of the buried foundations below ground. Into these empty foundations we introduced water, which operated as draining pools to filter gases from the soil. Lastly, through the addition of new biogas holders, the site returned to its former purpose, providing clean energy to Bedford for 100 more years to come. In Tim Ingold's The Temporality of Landscape, he calls upon us to critically engage with the idea of past, present, and future in respect to a constantly changing landscape environment. No object was more so representative of this temporality than a disused locomotive shed found northeast of the site. It had existed to house coal cargo trains arriving to the gasworks as early as 1880. It now appeared as a ruin, where nature had come to reclaim ground which was once its own. I understood it to have cathedral-like qualities. Like the buildings of Pultzig and Behrens, the shed stood at the time as a cathedral of the modern age, in awe of its power, might, and authority. Simultaneously, it had qualities of the picturesque, and an ability to hybridize nature, the individual, and monumentalism. Formal analysis for the shed confirmed its cathedral-like qualities. It had a central nave and aisles, alongside several buttressed lean-to structures. A long central hall gave the structure a natural procession, whilst formal analysis of the structure also revealed a pre-existing hybrid masonry and timber structure. The second timescale is that of the decade. Initial exploration of 2 rooms, a patient room and a main hall, revealed an architecture, and in particular a construction, which played up to the monumentality of the railway shed. This monumentalism dwarfed the experience of the individual and was too heavy, too fixed, too permanent. Research into Lacaton Vassal's Maison Latapie explored the ideas of primitivism in architecture. Their buildings offered an over-provision of space in order to accommodate large atrium spaces which allowed a blurring of threshold between inside and out. Particularly in their construction, expedient materials matched with bolted connections and thin structural members allowed the architecture to be transient, fleeting, and light. In the Management Science University, these large greenhouse-like spaces created quasi-exterior environments in which nature was brought into the building. In initial structural ideas, I explored how a light timber frame could be built within, on, and beyond the existing shed, exploring a balloon frame construction wrapped in a light polycarbonate skin. An initial construction section looked to reinterpret the industrial heritage of the site formally, as well as accentuate light, lean-to structures that were buttressed against the shed wall. Construction details at 1 to 20 and 1 to 5 were further explored at 3 points along this section. In these construction details, I looked to herald bolted and screw joints. I detailed expedient connections which enable the construction to be bolted on and off with ease. Through these details, I described an architecture which was fleeting and temporary, designed to be deconstructed and disappear again after 10 to 20 years. Minimizing the weight of the walls and reducing the size of timber members allowed me to not just be more economical with material use, but also touch the ground extremely lightly. For more annotation on these details, please refer to the associated technical booklet. A palette of construction materials was formulated to create a transgressive frame subversive to the monumental construction of the masonry shed. It included lumber oak, subject to controlled decay, a recyclable PVC polycarbonate facade, and limecrete foundations, which degraded into the soil. The idea of controlled deterioration of the building was formed in conjunction with the construction details to not only create a structure which could easily be assembled and disassembled, but that the structure was also subject to natural decay and would return to the earth after 10 to 20 years of use. The third timescale is that of the year. The journey to recovery begins in summer, with the heat of injury and the recluse of the room, to autumn, where there are first steps into an enclosed courtyard, to winter, where there is confidence, growing assurance in a new body, and finally, to spring, where there is recovery. The passing of time at the scale of the year has a significant impact on the plan. It is rooted in monastic and industrial formality, owing to an understanding of the spatial organisation of Durham Cathedral and La Thoronnais Abbey, and their ability to straddle monumental spaces with close, protected ones. As with Lacaton-Vassal, oversized circulation spaces in the plan warm core patient rooms without the need for insulation and provide communal spaces. Most importantly, a continuous ground runs through these spaces, kept as the original ground cover of the site. Critically, this ground cover is subject to high seasonal change. I imagined the ground according to Daisy Hildyard's The Second Body, where she described the river bursting its banks and flooding into her home as the moment in which she met her second body, nature. In winter, the ground cover therefore is in a retreated state, a low tide. The thin, lightweight construction provides a firm boundary as the patients retreat to the warmth of the core rooms. In spring, the tide of nature gathers pace and grows further into the landscape. It arrives at the thin wall of the proposal, but does not breach it. So too, the residents emerge from the winter warmth and use these large spaces for communal activities. In summer, the ground floods the plan and breaches the threshold. This has a transformative effect on the spatial arrangement of the plan. Spaces which do not exist in winter appear in bloom for the first time in summer and die away again as autumn comes. This swelling and constricting of ground cover is constructed in symphony with the movement of people from the core to the periphery of the building. This is horticulturally achieved through a selection of flowering plants and grasses that have high seasonal change and a resilience to gravelly surfaces. This includes carex grass, miscanthus, lazula grass, or even the simple daisy. This self-sufficient process allows these specific species to fall away and shrivel in winter to provide a mulch for new seeds to grow. By creating large quasi-greenhouse spaces within the building, plants are subject to an accelerated bloom. This accelerated bloom means that plants within the building may signal the oncoming change in seasons, some 10 to 16 days before their exterior counterparts. In this way, the building itself operates as a subtle signifier of the passing of time. This is facilitated by the particular environmental conditions of these spaces, detailed in the associated technical booklet. Seasonal change in the plan doesn't just have a spatial impact, but a programmatic impact too. Spaces like these bring nature in, but across the year have multiple communal functions for patients. In winter, the hard ground provides space for physiotherapy. In autumn, semi-hard ground allows space for performance. In spring, as the ground floods in and becomes richer, garden therapy. In summer, full ground cover is the perfect setting for an art class. Seasonal change in the plan also causes spaces to appear and disappear at certain times of the year. Back-of-house courtyards like this, which revel in their forgotten and abandoned qualities, may be used for storage in winter, picking leaves in autumn, an arrival garden in summer. This, therefore, is the spatial, programmatic, and experiential impact of the plan and its synthesis with nature across the year. The last timescale is that of the day. Inspired by Lucien Heur's photography of Lathornay Abbey, I saw there to be a strength in darkness, where dim, closed rooms were used for the comfort of recovery. At the same time in the day, sunlight could be used to provide reflection, which maintained the patient's privacy. Similarly, I explored the strength of light, and at how at different times of the day it may strengthen or soften the texture of a masonry wall. Alongside this, I constructed the structural density of the building along with the colour density of its interior. Here, primary, secondary and tertiary beams were coloured red, blue and pink. A thin, translucent polycarbonate veil wrapped the building and revealed little of this colour on approach. Inspired by Joseph Alber's colour test number 34, the festive colour of the building intensified as you drove further in. As the structure became denser toward the core patient rooms, so too did the colour scheme. However, this colour scheme was not stagnant. On a cherry blossom branch in strong direct sunlight, the colours became saturated and vibrant, but as the sun wanes and the weather becomes overcast, the colours desaturate and they dim, making a similar analogy with the colour scheme of the beams. As the sunlight pans across the structure, so too do its colours flicker and dance. Therefore, the building is in constant motion in alignment with the light of day. A northern facade facing the street gives the proposal a subtle civic presence. A Campanieri lantern to the east calls to the city beyond the bridge. However, on approach, the entry to the building is much more subtle. The facade harks back to an industrial formality, where a highly translucent thermal skin is accentuated by patches of colour in order to enliven the streets. A light construction gives primacy to green spaces, which both envelop and are contained inside the facade. Tucked away behind advertising boards and in between gaps of trees were two formal entrances. The first take the patient on foot, off the bridge, and down a single-storey flight of stairs with a disabled lift, into an intimate crash courtyard. The second takes the patient via vehicle through to an entrance behind the existing advertising boards. Warmth and coolth similarly oscillate as you traverse the building, as patients move from warm, insulated core rooms to semi-insulated buffer zones and into fully open spaces. In section, these bioclimatic buffer zones help to warm central core rooms without the need for insulation, whilst enabling the construction to be significantly lighter. For further details, please refer to the technical booklet. The final proposal encompasses the sentiment of Mono no Aware. As a physical rehabilitation centre, it revels in the scales of time that pass as the individual process of recovery begins. As a proposal, it revels in the temporality of the landscape on which it lies, understanding that its presence is subject to much larger cycles of hydrology, ecology, and horticulture. The plan describes core residential rooms, centred around an internal courtyard, whilst an overprovision of space provides communal patient spaces. A street frontage to the north provides two formal but disguised entrance courtyards, whilst the large main hall remains as an indoor therapy garden and overrun ruin. The plan to the west and the south is softened as the proposal diffuses into the landscape beyond. An ecological plan gives as much of an equivalence to the horticultural arrangement of the building as the programmatic arrangement of its rooms. A section, cut east to west, takes the individual down from the bridge into a crash courtyard and through into the large open-air hall. The individual is taken on a journey through spaces which continually challenge the threshold between inside and out. Moving to core patient rooms, the individual is given access to communal spaces which open out onto the landscape beyond. A section cut north to south describes a more linear journey. A two-storey space attached to the existing masonry descends into a small-scale patient room, which backs out onto an internal courtyard. This is mirrored before a patient's room opens out onto a quasi-exterior communal space. In summary, the proposal gives nature and industry a Hiroshige-style equivalence. It reappropriates its industrial heritage and creates its own civic but disguised presence in the city. It heralds a lightweight, temporary construction, which is enlivened through its own construction details at 1 to 20, 1 to 10, and 1 to 5. Alongside this, an environmental strategy continually oscillates warmth and coolth. The proposal also operates with high seasonal change for both the individual and the plan itself. Finally, it flickers in constant motion as light, colour and warmth dance in alignment with the length of the day. Throughout this project, we have undergone a journey of change, transience and impermanence. No object in the landscape embodies the themes of Mono no Aware so viscerally than that of a disused locomotive shed. Indeed, in the present day, the shed is a ruin, abandoned. In 10 years' time, the ruin is inhabited, transformed. In 100 years' time, it will return to a ruin, and nature will have reclaimed a ground which was once its own. Past, present, and future align as the site comes full circle. This, therefore, is Mono no Aware, an awareness of impermanence.